Hello, I'm Daryl Owens, and this is A World of Difference. Our program celebrates and supports families rearing children who think and learn differently on their life journeys from kindergarten through college. A World of Difference is an educational outreach program of Beacon College. The Leesburg, Florida school is America's first accredited college or university devoted to educating students with learning disabilities, ADHD, dyslexia, and other learning differences. So let's jump right in. In the young adult novel, Peta Lyra's Rating Normal, the protagonist makes this astounding observation. Nothing escapes my alphabet powers. It's exhausting. The alphabet to which Peta was referring included just 4 letters, ADHD. Indeed, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder can be exhausting for a child with a racing mind, impulsivity, and difficulty internalizing and enacting guidelines. And for the parents trying to impose normal rulemaking and household routines in rearing and loving such a child, that also can be utterly frustrating and overwhelming. But for the child who seemingly is ignoring or annoying or embarrassing you, but really isn't, acting willfully, ADHD is just as frustrating. Before you can successfully parent a child with ADHD, it's critical that parents understand the full measure of the child's condition and its global impact on the family. It's then that parents can begin to meet the challenges of helping your child manage his or her condition and master strategies for success. So, what is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder? How can I teach my child structure? How can I discipline with purpose and warmth? On this episode of A World of Difference, we'll visit an innovative small private school in Leesburg, Florida that integrates art and movement into the 3 R's and has proven to be just what the doctor ordered for students with ADHD. Next, we'll do a deeper dive in the alphabet soup of ADHD and explore ways that parents can better support their children with the help of our esteemed panel of experts in our Ask the Experts segment. Finally, we'll introduce you to this month's difference maker, an entrepreneur whose ADHD has powered the launch of several companies and the publication of a host of books. Can keeping my child busy mitigate problems with ADHD? How important is self-care for parents rearing children with ADHD? How can I limit distractions in my child's life? Answers to these questions and more coming up momentarily. But first, research shows physical activity may improve concentration, burns excess energy in healthy ways, and leads to better sleep. Fold in classes that allow creativity to flourish, and you've got a winning recipe for teaching gifted and creative children who don't flourish in cookie-cutter classrooms. In this month's Rising Above, we visit Create Conservatory, where learning about the solar system might find a galaxy of students orbiting around the classroom, courtesy of a STEM curriculum grounded in arts integration. Here is correspondent Cindy Peterson with the story.
We're here at Create Conservatory, a new arts integration STEM school in Leesburg, Florida that is inspiring kids to learn in unique ways. Founder Nikki Duslack had been a public school teacher for years and realized how many of the students fell through the cracks because they didn't learn the standard way. So Nikki began the nonprofit 501c3 school, where their motto is coloring outside the lines.
We teach STEM education through arts integration, which is what really makes us different than the vast majority of schools. And what arts integration basically is that we use the arts either as the vehicle to teach students or the way that we assess their learning. And sometimes it's both of those things. And so the really beautiful part about Create Conservatory is that although we didn't necessarily start out to be a school that really caters and is a place where children with learning differences can necessarily come, we've found that it's actually this beautiful byproduct, because arts integration in and of itself really allows for a lot of creativity and a lot of movement and a lot of free thinking. And so what we find is that in areas where children may have not been successful in your typical traditional classroom, they really thrive with us because we teach science through dance and drawing and music and movement, and we teach social studies through singing and drawing and painting. And so it really provides children with that freedom and flexibility where they're allowed to get up and move. That's one of the really beautiful parts about us, is that we find that children, particularly children that have an ADHD diagnosis, really thrive with us because they're able to get up and move around, and they're able to think differently and process differently.
Second grader Emily Weaver, who was diagnosed with ADHD at age 6, shared with us one of her favorite ways to learn.
The numerator's the parts, the dominator's the whole, and fractions are parts of a whole. What one whole is just like, say like there's one whole pie and you cut it in half. It's like 2 people in a group. Let's say there's 4 people and one whole pizza. You cut that pizza into 4. If one more person is here, cut it into 5.
But it hasn't been an easy road for Emily and her mom, Laura. Learning had become difficult at her regular school, and even eating together at the dinner table was a struggle.
I knew early on that Emily was not a traditional learner. She struggled to maintain her focus. She struggled to stay on task, and she found herself very frustrated and very angry because she identified that she learned differently. And it became a source of sadness or anger because she was frustrated. And so this kid grew up loving to smile, loving to sing, loving to engage, and work with people and meet people, and she was outgoing, but when it came to learning and focused learning, she was extremely frustrated.
But since attending Create Conservatory, many of these frustrations have disappeared, and Emily is now blossoming at her own pace.
I have seen frustration turn into achievement and self-esteem. And I believe that the methods that are here that employ her the ability and learn the skill to continue that passion for learning are more than evident in just less than a year's time. Her being able to achieve on her own has given her self-esteem, and it's given her the drive to continue to learn, even though she sees that she doesn't learn like most children. So that has been the single biggest, I think, best thing, that she has confidence and she has real skill that she is going to be able to refer back to as she continues to learn of how she learns and when she learns and why she's the way she is.
Since opening the school, Nikki's passion for teaching has only increased as she has watched the kids grow and become inspired to learn.
So we really empower them to be independent, individual thinkers. And then we really believe in setting those fence posts and goal posts and then kind of getting out of their way a little bit and letting them grapple and struggle and explore, because I think the traditional system has removed so much of that exploration. And I think particularly for children that learn differently or children that have an ADHD diagnosis, that exploration and that freedom is so important to not only their well-being, but their self-esteem, their ability to learn and actually comprehend and not just memorize facts to spit them back out. You know, we see so oftentimes that kids in our classroom will remember things that I forgot. You know, they'll say, well, Mrs. Duslack, remember back in October you said this thing, or they'll sing me a bit of a song that I taught them, and I'm over here going like, oh, I totally forgot that we did that, but they've remembered because it's become a part of them. Same thing with the Macarena or the electric slide, right? These things, they stay with us because they've become a part of who we are. And so we find that a lot of times kids that learn differently just really blossom with us.
To find out more, visit createconservatory.com. With a world of difference, I'm Cindy Peterson.
Thanks, Cindy, for that fascinating story. Now, let's take a deeper dive into ADHD with our panel of experts. Joining us are Dr. Arthur Bregman, Dr. Gilbert E. Franco, and nurse practitioner Rashonda R. Musawwir. Arthur Bregman, MD, is a Miami psychiatrist who has been in practice for years. Today, he and his practice of psychiatrists and therapists see patients of all ages who need mental health support. His specialty is in ADHD, both for adolescents and adults. As an early adopter of telemedicine, Bregman currently sees patients from Florida and across the country. His expertise in child and adolescent psychiatry was instrumental when he served for more than a decade as chief of psychiatry for Nicholas Children's Hospital in Miami. Gilbert E. Franco, PhD, is a licensed marriage and family therapist and an assistant professor of psychology at Beacon College. Before coming to Beacon, Franco served as clinical director for the McAllister Institute in El Cajon, where he supervised interns studying marriage and family therapy and clinical social work. He earned his bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of California, San Diego, a master's in marriage and family therapy from Alliant International University in San Diego, and a master's in organizational psychology from Walden University in Minneapolis, where he also earned his PhD in IO psychology. Rashonda R. Musawwir is a pediatric nurse practitioner with the Orlando Health Arnold Palmer Hospital for Children Behavioral and Developmental Center. She assesses and provides psychopharmacological treatment for children and young adults. Her focus is on children with developmental delays, ADHD, autism, anxiety disorders, and learning difficulties. Musawwir is a board-certified advanced practice registered nurse by the Florida Board of Nursing and also certified as a pediatric nurse practitioner and a pediatric mental health specialist by the Pediatric Nursing Certification Board. She earned her Associate of Science in Nursing degree from Valencia College and her Bachelor and Master of Science in Nursing degrees from the University of Central Florida. Joining us today by Zoom is Dr. Arthur Bregman and also nurse practitioner Rashonda Musawwir. But joining me in the studio is Dr. Gilbert Franco. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you, thank you.
And our first question today is going to be for Dr. Bregman. Despite its lengthy name, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder does a poor job capturing the full dimensions of the condition. Can you provide a more fulsome summary of what ADHD is?
Do you have ADHD? Well, you know, it used to be called minimal brain disorder. And I've been practicing for 40 years. I've had people say, no, doc, I don't want that, okay? So you could understand that calling it ADD, people would say to me, doc, I got that. I think my friends have that too. So there's something about calling it something that is not a horrible name allows people to accept it more. So really, it's very important to address the issue of ADD if you have it. Usually it's good to go to see a clinician to see what's going on, get it addressed, come up with some kind of treatment plan, and get yourself on the road. You know, for adults, there's also adult ADD. Well, how do I know if I have ADHD? Well, there's a child forms and there's adult forms. You know, the children, they're really getting them in school. The teachers are getting much better at identifying them and sending them to clinicians. A lot of the kids can act as ODD, like oppositional defiant, learning disabilities, learning problems. The older kids tend to even develop substance abuse problems, be disruptive, be moody. So the thing to do here is don't put your head in the sand. Early intervention is what counts. See a clinician and get the child diagnosed in a good assessment.
Next question is for you, Dr. Franco. Why can parenting a child with ADHD be so frustrating, particularly when they have neurotypical children that they're also raising?
Well, that's a great question, and thank you for asking that. So, when you're looking at a parent, they have to, divide their attention into different siblings. And when a group of siblings have a certain needs, and then another group of siblings have their own needs, it can be very difficult for a parent to know what exactly to do, because again, parenting a neurotypical child is very different than parenting a child with ADHD, for example.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Doctor.
You're welcome.
So our next question is for you, Rashonda. How does ADHD impact the rest of the family, particularly siblings?
So for many of our families, they, express concerns about interactions within the family with children with ADHD. And what we oftentimes find is parents are frustrated. Their siblings can be somewhat frustrated as well. But I also find that siblings tend to be quite forgiving, knowing that their sibling has difficulties with maybe some impulse control, and maybe sharing and taking turns can be difficult for children with ADHD. But they also, do have some difficulties with those behaviors at times, because it can impact the social relationship between the siblings. But for parents, most times I find that the frustration comes from just difficulty getting through your day-to-day tasks that should seem to kind of flow with routines and whatnot.
All right. Dr. Franco, in your experience, is one of the issues that parents face when trying to parent a child with ADHD is their reluctance to accept that the child with ADHD has a different functioning brain?
Great question. So, in my experience, both teaching children with ADHD, but also being a therapist, I find that it's not so much that parents have trouble accepting. I mean, there is a group of parents that have trouble accepting. It's understanding what ADHD really is. And oftentimes through psychoeducation and through family therapy, one of the biggest things that parents realize is that, wow, my child has these differences, but at the same time, I could do something about these differences and help them out.
Thank you, Doctor. Our next question is to nurse practitioner Musawwir. Generally speaking, what are some of the common problems children with ADHD face?
Some common challenges that children with ADHD face most times includes tasks and things that deals with focusing and maintaining attention. So with ADHD, it's broken down into a few different areas, but primarily the concerns are focus difficulties and poor concentration, which includes distractibility. And then we also have hyperactivity, impulse control. Those two oftentimes go together. And then we also have sometimes where there's emotional reactivity. So commonly what parents and teachers have shared with children with ADHD includes difficulties staying on task, following directions. We also hear just being very easily distracted, which prevents them from finishing tasks as well. And sometimes it's a misperception that the distractibility is from outside influences, when actually it can also be their own thoughts that may distract them as well. And then, of course, we hear the difficulties remaining seated, difficulties sitting for like dinner time and meals, and then impulsivity, kind of just thinking without or acting without thinking. If they see something really cool, they may dart out and go and check it out rather than ask for permission before going over to it. And then we also hear sometimes difficulties with sleeping. Sometimes there are also some sensory sensitivities involved with ADHD that are oftentimes missed as well.
Dr. Bregman, often in parenting, the focus is on modifying the child's behavior. In parenting a child with ADHD, my question is the reverse true, that mom and dad must modify their behavior first in order to help and to learn to manage the behavior of the child?
If your child has ADHD, what is the best approach for the family to deal with this? Now, family approach in treating ADHD is really important. What I do in my practice is I get the whole family together. And what I do is I say to the youngest kid, who here has it? And the little kid raises his hand, Dad. And I said, what do you think about that, Mom? Yeah, I think he's got it. So the family approach gets everybody on board and talks about what all the problems are and comes up with a treatment plan for everybody. So it's really important to have some family involvement, and that way everybody gets some help. Good luck.
Dr. Franco, what are some of the do's and don'ts that parents should put into practice when trying to raise their ADHD child to be successful?
Oh, great question. So I have 3 do's and 3 don'ts for parents to keep in mind. And that would be, let's start with the don'ts. So the don'ts would be, don't judge your kid, don't judge your child. Again, children have their own feelings and thoughts, and when you judge them, children are really good at picking them up. Another don't would be, don't assume that just because ADHD looks like this on the textbook, that it looks just like that on the child. And then number 3, don't assume that you or your child are always wrong in your behaviors. It could be that these behaviors are a manifestation of something else. Now, as far as do's, always, number 1, express empathy for your child and think, okay, how are things happening in your child's point of view? Number 2, to help you out with that, imagine yourself when you were a child and you're seeing this parent who is much taller than you, much larger than you, talking to you about what you're doing wrong. How would that feel like? And then number 3, always be there for your child when they need you. With an ADHD child, just like any child, they need their parents to be there with them. They need their parents there 24/7 to cater to their needs.
Well, thank you for that. And you make an important point, I think, that when you're parenting a child with ADHD, you're parenting one child with ADHD, that they're all going to be different and unique.
Exactly.
Dr. Bregman, few parents are going to be 100% supportive all the time. Should parents flog themselves for becoming overwhelmed or frustrated with their child? And a follow-up question, doctor, would be, how can mom and dad reduce the likelihood of such cracks forming in their parental armor?
Moms are coming to me all the time asking, Doc, I've reached the end of my rope. I don't know what I can do. It's really out of control now. I mean, what do I do, Doc? And look, I've seen a lot of these parents. They're all scared. They feel out of control. I help them understand that we could do something about this. Everybody needs to be involved. Let's get your child evaluated, possibly medicated. Let's make a good treatment plan, for the family and calm some things down. Look, this isn't a life sentence. A lot of kids with ADHD grow up to be.
Dr. Franco, ADHD reminds me of a jazz song by jazz great Fats Waller, Ain't Misbehaving. Now, a lot of times when a child with ADHD does something that we perceive as misbehaving, is it truly that, or is it something that they can't control most likely?
There are some times when a child with ADHD, just like any child, is misbehaving. But many behaviors that we think a child that has ADHD is doing that we find as misbehaving is not really misbehaving. For example, the hyperactivity, climbing the walls, running around the room. Again, children with ADHD can't help these behaviors, especially if they have that hyperactivity specification. So it really isn't their fault.
Well, how do you as a parent discern the difference?
Good question. So being a parent of 4 kids myself, it's a parent really has to get to know their child, and the difference in someone who is misbehaving and running up the walls versus someone who has ADHD and is running up the walls is that the one with ADHD does it with no triggers. In other words, they just do it with no other factors, or purpose. Whereas someone who doesn't have ADHD, a child who doesn't have ADHD, does it for a purpose. For example, maybe to get a rise out of the parent, or to, maybe they are bored or something like that.
All right, thank you for that. Dr. Bregman, as for discipline, what works best for ADHD kids? Is using rewards and consequences, for instance, the best tact?
My child has ADHD. What should I do? Do you think some behavior modification is a good way to go? Absolutely. We're really good at behavior mod. You need a very competent therapist to come up with a good plan. It helps everybody. Everybody's on the same page. The kids know what they need to do, and the kids move ahead really quickly. So my advice is certainly go and get a competent behavioral therapist who could help manage your ADHD and use a comprehensive plan. Also think med management, some family therapy, etc. Good luck.
And another question to you, nurse practitioner Musawwir. Because you deal in pharmacology, and we typically don't discuss medications on this show, but I'm wondering, how can parents make the best decision about whether or not to pursue prescriptions for their ADHD child?
The question regarding pharmacological management and medication for ADHD comes up quite often. Many times parents unfortunately have heard negative stories related to treating ADHD with medication. So I usually urge parents, you really need to have a very open discussion with your provider, whether it be your pediatrician or a specialist like myself, but learning about the benefits of treating with medication, as well as the side effects or common concerns with treating with medication. I will tell you that majority of the time medication tends to be the best response that we have, in addition to school accommodations as well as behavioral counseling services. But I also teach parents that it's not a one method of treatment that's going to outdo everything. So you really need to kind of have an around approach that treats from different angles, so that we can treat not just during the day, but what do we do when medication wears off? Or, what do we do when we're not responding to medication? So those are things you really should discuss thoroughly with your provider, so that you can discuss myths and, dispel some myths and maybe learn some truths about really what we recommend and why we recommend them.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Gilbert Franco, Dr. Arthur Bregman, and nurse practitioner Rashonda Musawwir for joining us and sharing their wisdom today. Do you have questions about learning differences? Are there concerns you're facing daily in your journey with learning and attention issues? We're happy to answer your questions on air. Sign up via our website, awodtv.org, to have your questions answered during our Ask the Expert segment on an upcoming episode of A World of Difference. Now, let's meet this month's difference maker. The New York Times has called Peter Shankman a rock star who knows everything about social media and then some. He's a 5 times best-selling author, entrepreneur, and corporate keynote speaker focusing on customer service in the new and emerging customer and neuroatypical economy, with 3 startup launches and exits under his belt, most notably a service called Help a Reporter Out. Shankman is recognized worldwide for radically new ways of thinking about the customer experience, social media, PR, marketing, advertising, and ADHD, and the new neurodiverse and remote economies. And then there's his podcast, Faster Than Normal, a leading podcast on ADHD, focusing on the superpowers and gifts of having a faster than normal brain, which has helped thousands of people all around the world realize that having a neurodiverse brain is actually a gift, not a curse. Here's a World of Difference correspondent, Brad Kuhn, with his story.
Some people crave attention. Peter Shankman is one of those people.
Who am I and why are you listening to me?
Here with me now is branding and social media expert, founder and CEO of the PR firm, The Geek Factory, Inc. Author, consultant, entrepreneur, celebrity branding expert.
An incredible online force. I mean, the guy's on TV like 3-4 times a week.
Shankman lives with ADHD, a chemical imbalance that suppresses production of dopamine, the feel-good juice produced by the brain's reward and pleasure center. Like others with ADHD, Shankman says he has always been prone to periods of hyperactivity and has had trouble focusing on a single task or topic over extended periods of time. As a child, that made him a discipline problem.
Well, I mean, yeah, I just know that I was in trouble a lot. And, the subjects I loved, I was really good at, I was great at. I focused all the time. I did exactly what I was supposed to do. But the subjects I wasn't really great at, I manifested in getting in trouble, talking out of turn, talking out in class, making jokes. Realizing it now, what I realize is the jokes that I was making was an attempt to make the students laugh, because if the students laughed, it gave me a hit of dopamine. And looking back on it now, I realized that dopamine was what allowed me to focus, and I was actually getting in trouble because I was trying to learn.
Attention, especially positive attention, Shankman says, is a dopamine trigger. So when someone with ADHD acts out to get attention, they are, in a very real sense, craving that sense of well-being that a dopamine fix will provide.
Growing up, I had the social acuity of a turnip. I mean, I was not someone who had many friends. I had a couple of friends, but the majority of kids, they didn't really like me, and because I was always weird, I was different, I was always doing, strange things. And over time, again, as I started to learn what this was and how to use it as I get older, I realized, okay, there are, certain times where you just have to learn to shut up, and I gained social acuity as I get older, but yeah, as a kid, it was very tough.
Shankman wasn't formally diagnosed with ADHD until his mid-30s. By that time, he'd started and sold 2 companies, and started a third, Help a Reporter Out, a sort of Kiplinger letter for PR professionals, actionable business leads in the form of a twice-daily email listing queries from reporters seeking sources.
Well, the beauty of ADHD is that you tend to do things really, really fast, and that's good and bad. It's good because when you have ideas, you can implement them almost immediately. Most people, I should write this out, I should plot this, I should talk to people, I should get it. ADHD, you're just 90 miles an hour straight ahead, right? And so, when I launched Help a Reporter Out, I came up with the idea on an airplane. By the time I landed 5 hours later, I had a working website, right? And most people don't do that. And so if you are able to channel that speed into positive ways, you're unstoppable. The flip side, though, is you need to be very aware of what you're doing and how you're doing it, because you run the risk of driving off a cliff. You don't just flick a switch and all of a sudden you see yourself as a success. I'm still, I'll write a book and I'll get 400 positive reviews and 1 negative review, and the 1 negative review is the one I focus on for weeks. 10,000 people give me a standing ovation at a keynote. One person says, I think you spoke too fast, and that's all I think about for the next 2 weeks. It doesn't just go away. Imposter syndrome is very, very closely related to neurodiversity. And it's very easy for me to think, wow, I did all this great stuff, but it was all a fraud, and it's totally fake. The joke I have is every day I wake up and I'm sure that this is the day the New York Times is going to write this huge story on me about what a fraud I am. And then when they don't do it, it's obviously because I'm not worthy enough to be in the New York Times. So, it's this constant battle that you have to fight with yourself every single day.
With great power comes great responsibility. Shankman says he has developed what he calls life rules to help him manage his dopamine levels and make sure he can function effectively, both professionally and personally.
I go to bed super early and I'm up super early. I'm up super early so I can exercise. I'm a single dad, so I'm up super early so I can exercise before my daughter wakes up. If I don't exercise, I don't get that dopamine, I don't get that adrenaline, I don't get the things I need to make my day better. So for me, it's very much about getting that hit of adrenaline, that hit of dopamine. So it might be an hour on the bike or going out for a run or whatever, doing that before my day starts. And, sometimes based on my schedule, that might mean running as early as 3 in the morning, but I have to do it. And so I do it, and it allows me to be the best I can be. And so, you put these rules into place that benefit you. I have 2 sides to my closet, and they're labeled. One says office/travel, and it's t-shirt and jeans. The other says speaking/TV, and it's button-down shirt, jacket, and jeans, and that's it. My suits, my vests, all that stuff is in my daughter's closet. Because if I had to look at that every day, what should I wear? Oh, that vest, I remember that vest. Laura gave me that vest. I wonder how she's doing. It's 3 hours later. I'm naked in the living room on Facebook. I haven't left the house. So you understand what works for you, and you learn to implement it.
Based on his own experience and observations, Shankman has come to believe that everyone has gifts, potential, and abilities far beyond what society has deemed normal.
after I sold my company, I spent a couple of years doing sort of an internal dialogue with myself, like, how come you can start and sell a multi-million-dollar company, but you can't remember to take out the garbage? Or, how come you can do this and yet you couldn't seem to stay married for more than 6 years? And I went through this whole interaction with myself, and I realized, okay, there are benefits and curses to how my brain works. Let's analyze those. Let's figure those out, and maybe I can help people with it.
Peter Shankman is living proof that it is easier to think outside the box when your brain refuses to be boxed.
Stop trying to fit into the roles that everyone tells you to fit into. That's not going to work, and it's going to just drive you crazy. Embrace your differences. Learn how to use them to your advantage, right? At some point, you have to live your life the best way you can. And if that means you're a little different, but it benefits you, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And stop caring what other people think. The only people that matter to you, find a core group of people that understand you and get you. They're the ones that matter to you, and they're the ones that whose opinions you want to take. Everyone else can go away.
For a World of Difference, I'm Brad Kuhn.
Thanks for the story, Brad. And congratulations, Peter. Your boundless creativity and your commitment to live authentically offers a roadmap for making a difference how the world sees ADHD. And that brings us to the end of this episode of A World of Difference. How are we doing? Do you like what you're seeing? Are there learning disability issues that you'd like us to cover? Are there some features that you'd like us to present? Let us hear from you. Your feedback lets us know whether or not we're on the right path or whether we need to alter course to bring the information that truly helps celebrate and support you on your neurodiversity journey. You can write us at contact@awodtv.org. Meanwhile, you can rewatch this episode or catch up on past episodes at awodtv.org. There you'll find bios of our experts, plus downloadable expanded tip sheets. You can also visit the Beacon College Facebook page, clicking on videos and then browsing under series, or view the program on Beacon College's YouTube channel. Podcast lovers can listen on the go on Spotify, Breaker, Google Podcasts, and other popular podcasting platforms. On our next episode, we'll look how we can help make parenting children who learn differently and self-care easier for mom and dad. Until the next time, for Cindy Peterson, Brad Kuhn, and the Lakefront TV team, I'm Daryl Owens. Thanks for tuning in.